You know, when I looked at the weather this morning, it was not going to rain, right? And it was not going to be this cold. And you know, I think this is just part of the way that the devil attacks us when we're doing things that we're supposed to be doing. And we can feel that, you know, and this is just one thing. I'm going to tell you, leaving Lake Charles this morning was incredibly difficult. All 5 of my children, who are usually really, I'm going to say they're really well-mannered, and then I'm not going to point them out just in case, are usually really well-mannered, were being incredibly defiant about every single thing we asked them to do. Then our car stopped working, and then we went to print out my speech and left it on the printer. And when we went back to get it, we accidentally tripped the alarm at the office. And so things just, you know, one time when I got to Dallas to speak, I got a message and my daughter was in the hospital. She had broken her arm. And these are the things that happen whenever we're doing what God wants us to do. You know, and they come in subtly and we don't really expect them, but that's how spiritual warfare works. I'm going to be talking about spiritual warfare. But first I want to share with you, you know, my kids, they play outside a lot. There's 5 of them. No, they're 11, 9, 7, 7, and 6. There's a lot of dirt, there's a lot of blood, there's a lot of sweat and a lot of tears, and we have a rule in our house that we do not wear shoes in the house. And every day, my kids come home from school, or they come inside just to grab something, and they have their shoes on in the house. And every time I see it, I say, hey, we don't wear shoes in the house. You know what they say to me? Why do you have shoes on in the house? And 100% of the time, I do have shoes on in the house. And to all you parents out there, what do you think happens whenever they say that to me? Well, I get indignant. And I start rattling off all the reasons that I'm allowed to wear my shoes in the house. The rules don't apply to me. This is my house. I bought this house, and I bought these shoes, and I pay the person that cleans this house. When you move out and you have your own house, if you want to wear your shoes in your house, you can wear your shoes in your house. But you don't wear shoes in my house. You see how quickly that changed from we don't wear shoes in the house to you don't wear shoes in my house? And then they do whatever they came inside to do, and they go back outside, and I'm left standing alone, indignant and frustrated, with my shoes on in the house. To myself and myself alone, I have to admit that they are right. If I'm the one setting the rules, but I'm not following the rules, how am I leading my family? How am I setting the example that the right thing is always the right thing? And how am I living in integrity and truth with what I say is important? Because my kids, our kids, in fact, the entire next generations, they're looking to us. Not just to hear what we say is important, but to see what we do. Because that sets the example and shows them what is important. And I share this story with you because some of the things I'm going to say today, especially to the men and the church leaders, might bring up feelings of indignation. And that's all right. Because as men, sometimes we got to work through our defenses in our heads until we get to a point of recognizing truth. And I promise you that everything that I say today will be based on truth. Ephesians 6:12 tells us that we are in a spiritual war, a war against the evil forces of the heavenly realms. John 8:44 tells us that Satan is the father of lies. And Ephesians 6:13 through 14 makes clear that as we put on the full armor of God, the first and most important tool that we have is the belt of truth. Without it, we have nowhere to hang our sword, and our pants will fall off. The lies sound like this. Abortion is a women's issue. Abortion is health care. Abortion is about bodily autonomy. You just want to control women's bodies. No uterus, no opinion. Abortion doesn't affect men. But the truth tells a different story. The truth is that abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human life. The truth is that healthcare saves lives, it doesn't end life. The truth is that there are plenty of laws which restrict people's bodily autonomy when they try to use that autonomy to hurt other people. Nobody's fighting for the autonomy of rapists or child molesters or pedophiles. The truth is that men were created purposefully and by design to protect, to provide, to lead, to serve, and to leave a legacy that honors God. That is biblical masculinity. The truth is that men have failed to fulfill that masculine role when it comes to abortion. We have accepted the lie that abortion doesn't affect us. and that we have no right to fight against it, and we've taken a seat on the sidelines, passive and silent. It's a recreation of the fall in the garden. Satan separating the perfect union between God and man and woman, taking the woman aside and whispering lies into her ear. You are not good enough, strong enough, capable enough, just the way God made you. If you truly want to become everything that you can become, if you want to fulfill your true potential, you have to do the most unnatural thing you can think of, the one thing God told you not to do. Just eat this fruit and the world can be yours. Just get rid of the baby and the world can be yours. We all know this story, right? The woman was tricked by the devil and they ate the apple and caused original sin. The end, right? No. Because in the very next verse in Genesis 3:6, she turned and gave the fruit to her husband who was with her. Adam was right there, watching, waiting, silent, passive, probably thinking, her mouth, her choice. If she eats that fruit, the consequences are all on her. It doesn't affect me. What a horrible miscalculation. Original sin is not the fault of a woman being tricked in the garden. Original sin is the product of the complete and utter failure of masculinity. Adam's passivity and silence was a failure to protect, a failure to provide, a failure to lead, and a failure to serve, and a failure to leave a legacy that honors God. Instead, man's passivity and silence left a legacy of death. And men, that is where we are today when we are passively pro-life. Yeah, we come to the marches and the fundraisers where it's safe to be a man and stand for life. God doesn't call us to be safe. God commands us to be courageous. Joshua 1:9 says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." But outside of those 2 or 3 pro-life social events each year, where are the men? We write checks to support pregnancy centers and other pro-life organizations. And look, I'm not discounting the checks. The entire pro-life movement runs on the donations of generous supporters. But we are called to give our time, our talent, and our treasure. Not our time, our talent, or our treasure. My friends, when it comes to abortion, we are in a spiritual war. A war being waged by Satan through the principalities, authorities, and rulers of this dark world. And in this war, 90% of those actively fighting for life, the boots on the ground every day, are women. And if we as men have consigned ourselves to sit back and write checks to fund a war that we send our women off to fight against pure evil itself, then we are failing in our own masculinity. The truth is that women who have abortions are 81% more likely to experience mental health problems and between 2 and 6 times more likely to commit suicide. And if we as men are silent and passive, then we are failing in our role to protect them from the lies of the abortion industry. The truth is that in 2024, there were reported 1.162 million abortions in this country. The number is going up. And if we as men are not actively fighting to end the slaughter of our babies, then we are failing to lead our families and communities, and we are failing to provide an example for our children of just how important this fight is. The truth is that 1.162 million babies had not only 1.162 million mothers, they had 1.162 million fathers. The truth is that 1 in 5 men will lose a child to abortion by the age of 45. The truth is that across ideological lines, men who lose a child to abortion are up to 4.5 times more likely to seek mental health professionals, 90% more likely to need antidepressants, 74% more likely to need prescription sleep aids, and 79% more likely to need anti-anxiety medications. The truth is that because men have bought into the lie that abortion doesn't affect us, when a man loses a child to abortion, he suffers with grief and guilt and shame and regret and loss silently in brokenness. The truth is, and I would bet $100 on this, judging by the size of this audience and my experience speaking, there's 6 men here who have lost a child to abortion and have never told a soul, except maybe their spouse and a priest. Because men don't talk about abortion. Why? Well, for one, we don't want to get shouted down with emotionally manipulative arguments. You just want to force 10-year-old rape victims to have babies. Why is it that child rape victims account for less than 1/2 of 1% of all abortions in this country, but 99.9% of the pro-choice arguments. Why do they feel so comfortable using innocent victims of the most heinous crime imaginable as pawns for their argument in favor of something they cannot otherwise support? If you ask them, hey, if I agree to allow abortions in the case of every rape, will you agree to ban them in every other case? 100% of the time, they will say no. Because they don't really care about the rape victims. They're just using them to shut you up and shut you down because it works. Because as a man, when somebody yells that at you, you immediately go to fight and flight. Well, no, I certainly don't just want to force 10-year-old rape victims to have babies. I don't want anybody to see me that way. I'll just sit this one out. It's the pro-abortion equivalent of calling you a Nazi to shut you up. It works. And the other reason men don't talk about abortion is because it has been drilled into us that abortion doesn't affect men. That message has been on repeat so many times over generations that we don't even associate the negative feelings, the shame, the guilt, the regret with the abortion, because it can't be that. And if it is, then something must be wrong with us. And we don't want to let people know that there's something wrong with us. The truth is that until men acknowledge that abortion doesn't just affect women, that abortion affects every single one of us, that abortion does affect men both directly and indirectly through those people that have been put in our care by God, until we acknowledge this and accept the role of men in actively fighting to end abortion, abortion will not end. On December 13th, 2005, I was lying face down on a dirty carpet in a dark and dirty hotel room, unable to move and overdosing. I was homeless, unemployed, and at the end of a 7-year methamphetamine addiction. I had been told earlier that day not to leave the room because law enforcement was coming to arrest me for stealing from my previous employer. I couldn't have made it to the phone if I wanted to, but nobody would have answered if I had called because I had destroyed every positive relationship in my life. For 7 years, I had put myself in the worst of situations where I could tell there was no way out. And every time I would pray to God, God, just help me out this one last time. You help me out this one last time and I will never do this again. And every time, God answered. And every time, I went right back to what I was doing. But this time was different. I didn't care anymore. I knew it was the end and I was done fighting. I knew that God didn't believe my prayers anymore. I didn't believe my prayers anymore. I wasn't scared to die. Honestly, I was probably more scared to continue living this life. But more than that, I was terrified of embarrassing my parents and my brother and my sister by being found dead of an overdose in a hotel room. And so I prayed. I prayed that God would get me through this, not for me, but for them. And I passed out. And when I woke up the next morning, my head was more clear than it had been in years. The police hadn't come, and I knew that I didn't want to be arrested. I knew that I didn't want to live this life anymore, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. I went down to the truck that I had been living out of for the past several years, and without even looking, I reached my hand behind the driver's seat, and I pulled out a pamphlet for a treatment center that had been shoved down there for 2 years. And I called them, and they said that I could get in that day. So I called my dad, who hadn't spoken to me in a month because of all the things that I had done to my family, and I told him what was going on. I said, I'm about to get arrested, but I can get into treatment, and I don't know what to do. And he said, well, you should go. Call them and tell them this is where you're going to be, and if they want to come get you, they'll get you. And that's what I did. And my dad met me, and he filled my gas tank, and I drove that little truck that hadn't had an oil change or maintenance in 5 years, 3.5 hours to that treatment center. I drove through the Kisatchie National Forest, just praying, God, please let me make it through this forest. I don't want to break down in the forest because bears. And I made it through the forest. And when I got to Shreveport, I started hitting hills. And that little truck started shaking. And I started praying, God, please just let me make it to the treatment center. And he answered. And I pulled that truck into the treatment center on Stoner Avenue. I kid you not. And that truck broke down in the parking lot. And I had to push it into a parking space. And I was safe. For the first time in 7 years, I was safe. There was nowhere to go and no way to get there. And I went inside and I told the lady in the front that I needed to call my dad and tell him I made it. And she said, your dad already called and got all the information. They'll be here this weekend to visit. And after everything I did to my family, all the craziness and theft and blaming and lying and manipulation for years and years and years, after all that, they were there every weekend. In treatment, there was a lot of counseling. There was a lot of writing and thinking and talking and going through my entire life to figure out, how did I get to this point? And one day while I was talking through my life, the counselor stopped me and she said, I really think we should talk about this. And if she hadn't stopped me, I would have just kept going, but she insisted. So it was 8 years earlier. I was 19 and I was away at college. And the girl I was dating came to my dorm room and sat me down and she told me she was pregnant. So I sat there in shock and I started working through all the ways this is going to change my life, right? Because the baby's coming and that's a big deal. This is going to change our lives. And she stopped me and she said, I'm not going to have the baby. I'm going to have an abortion. Now I knew what abortion was, but I didn't know anybody who'd ever had one. I didn't know that was something people actually did. This is before the internet. There were no TikTok videos of people shouting their abortions. It was something done quietly and secretly in the shadows. It didn't matter how many times I said, no, we're not having an abortion, we're having a baby. Her mind was made up. She made it clear to me that nothing that I did, nothing that I said, nothing that I felt mattered. And that was later reinforced by the school counselors who had understood that she was struggling with her grades after the abortion, but who, when I went and shared my own struggles, told me the abortion didn't affect me because I'm a man. And so I sat in my dorm room for the rest of the semester and I failed out of college. I moved home and I failed out of a second college 2 more times. I began living a life of destructive behavior, doing anything and everything I could to change the way I felt inside. For 7 years, not even knowing what it was I was trying to cover it up. I never associated the abortion, the loss, the guilt, the shame, the regret with how I felt or what I was doing because I was assured that the abortion didn't affect me. But somehow, immediately following the loss of my child, I also lost my ability to live until I ended up overdosing face down on a dirty hotel room floor. But in treatment, that counselor gave me permission to mourn the loss of my child. She gave me permission to express and to feel the guilt associated with my failure to protect my son. She encouraged me to name him. His name is Michael. She helped me to write letters forgiving the mom and my younger self, and a letter asking forgiveness from Michael. She gave me permission to acknowledge that the abortion that killed Michael did affect me. But what she didn't tell me was that I was not alone, that I was not the only man who had ever felt this loss and suffered silently for years, that there were other men who lost children to abortion and who were suffering in silence as well, thinking they were the only ones, just like I did. So I didn't talk about it again. I left treatment, I went back to college, then to law school. I married the woman I'd been pursuing for 7 years, but whom God was protecting until he helped to build me into a man worthy of her. And shortly after we got married, 8 years after treatment, so 16 years after the abortion, I was on a men's retreat. And all these men I knew and respected were sharing stories of extreme vulnerability, and there was no judgment, and I felt safe. So for the first time outside of my family, my counselors, and my wife, I unloaded and shared my story of loss and everything that came after it. And it was healing. But what was more powerful than the healing that I felt was the realization that me sharing had nothing to do with me. Because after I'd finished, 3 different men came up to me privately and said, I haven't told anybody this in 20 years or 30 years, but I lost my first child to abortion. My friends, this has happened every single time I have shared my story in the last 13 years. It'll happen today. By sharing my story and breaking the silence, other men are able to realize that they are not alone and to break theirs and to begin to heal. Because the truth is that abortion does affect men. And until we reject the lies that tell us otherwise, we cannot truly be the man that God created us to be. We cannot fully protect. We cannot fully provide. We cannot fully lead. We cannot fully serve. We cannot serve those entrusted to our service while we are tethered to the lies and brokenness. Now, after that retreat, I went back to work, building my career, building my business, building my family. We had 2 kids. We adopted 3 more. And I'll tell you what, I was really good at being a lawyer. I was really bad at being a lawyer and a husband and a father. And a few years ago, God made it clear to me that the law is not where he wanted me. That I had been playing it safe when I had been commanded to be courageous. And God called me away from that practice and into service with a national nonprofit called Men for Life. Now, when Men for Life started asking me to take it over, I said, heck no. I was playing it safe. For almost 2 years, they kept asking, and I kept saying no. I don't think that's where God wants me. Until one day, about 18 months ago, I was on an airplane minding my own business. And God very clearly convicted me with Proverbs 3:5 and said, hey, stop leaning on your own understanding and submit to my will. This is where I want you. And in August of 2024, I accepted the role as CEO of Men for Life. At Men for Life, our mission is to change the culture by restoring authentic masculinity, equipping men to speak boldly and stand confidently for life, family, and faith. Our vision is a world where abortion is unthinkable because men have returned to the arena to lead boldly, protect life, and to serve others as the men God called them to be. We will not end abortion until we change the culture. We will not change the culture if men do not lead from the front and publicly and visibly set the example of what it means to be pro-life, courageously, for everyone to see. I saw an interview with a guy named Cowboy Dwayne. He's a good old boy using his experience as a cowboy to help men reconnect with being men. And this is what he said. He said, this country is only as strong as the churches in this country. The churches are only as strong as the families that make up those churches. Those families are only as strong as the marriages that those families are built on. And those marriages are only as strong and as good as the man that God built those marriages on. As goes the man, so goes the marriage. As goes the marriage, so goes the family. As goes the family, so goes the churches. And as goes the church, so goes the country. Everything is built on the husband and the father. And this country is a failure today because the fathers and husbands have failed. Now, whether we agree our country is a failure, I think we can all agree that our country is failing when it comes to abortion. Total abortion numbers in this country are rising. We might think we're insulated here in Louisiana where there aren't any abortions, but 10,000 Louisiana residents had an abortion in 2024. 7,500 received the abortion pill by mail. 2,500 left the state and traveled for abortions. 80% of abortion pills are shipped to states that have pro-life laws banning abortion. So they tell us that late-term abortions never happen, but we keep seeing over and over, they're popping up. 34 weeks. Clinics do abortions up to 34 weeks, and they're proud. Pregnancy centers are under attack by state governments. Last week, the Wyoming Supreme Court struck down a ban against abortion. We partially defunded Planned Parenthood last year and then quietly allowed those funds to be released again. Honestly, I could have spent my entire time up here sharing the truths about abortion in our country today. I am proud to live in a state that is fighting. Speaker Johnson refused to budge on the Hyde Amendment. Senator Cassidy held hearings this week on the abortion pill. Our Attorney General indicted a California doctor for shipping pills into our state. These are all great things. But as we stand here today, if we look at the whole picture, America is failing when it comes to abortion. And I agree with Cowboy Dwayne. This falls on the husbands and the fathers. 54% of men identify as pro-life. 41% of men identify as pro-choice. We have the numbers. But passivity is the problem. Men are called to lead, and leaders are not passive. Sir Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. We simply cannot afford to do nothing. And that message isn't just for men, it's for the churches too. Remember what Cowboy Dwayne said. This country's only as strong as the churches in this country. Just as men are called to lead their families and their communities, the churches are called to lead as well. When churches fail to speak about abortion from the altar, everyone hears what is not said. The men who are leading their families hear that abortion isn't an issue worth discussing or fighting for. The young men and the young ladies hear that it must not be that big of a deal because the church talks about a lot of things. But if they're not talking about abortion, then it can't matter that much. And the people in the pews who have had abortions or have been party to abortions hear that their sin is not worth talking about, that it isn't worth redemption and forgiveness. When the churches fail to speak about abortion from the altar, they are failing to proclaim God's message that every single human being is an image bearer of God, worthy of life and love and respect, and that abortion is an attack on the very image of God. Pastors generally give 3 reasons why they don't talk about abortion. The first is, we don't talk about political issues. Well, let me assure you, abortion is not a political issue. Abortion is a spiritual issue. It is a human issue. And if we say we are not talking about political issues, then we are giving over the control to Satan to make any issue that is important to us a political issue. We are giving the enemy the ability to silence us. We are doing his work for him. The second objection is we will lose people. And to that I say, whose message are you preaching? Because in John 6:53 through 58, after feeding the 5,000, Jesus told them, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will not have eternal life. And he lost many disciples that day. He didn't chase them down. Jesus preached the truth no matter how uncomfortable it was to hear and without regard to whether it turned people away. Because truth is the only way to heaven. And avoiding the truth is failing to truly serve God's people in the way that you have been called to do. And the third objection is we don't want to offend the people in our pews who have had abortions. My friends, the people in your pews who have had abortions are hurting. And your failure to address that hurt head on so that they can truly know that there is forgiveness and redemption even after abortion is way more offensive than sharing the message of truth. Tomorrow is Sanctity of Life Sunday. And I challenge every priest and pastor in this audience to speak boldly about the evils of abortion and about forgiveness in the redeeming blood of Jesus Christ. I challenge you to be strong and courageous and without fear, knowing that God is with you. But more than that, I challenge you to make sure it's not a once-in-a-year thing. Because abortions are happening at a rate of almost 3,200 per day in this country. Your prayers and your preaching needs to be constant. And to the men, I want to end with this. Outside of the Bible, what I use to remind myself that as a man I am called to take action every day comes from a speech by Teddy Roosevelt, the man in the arena. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. Passivity is a failure of masculinity. Silence is a failure of masculinity. The reason the abortion industry and all those who support it are so quick to try to get men to sit down and shut up is because they know how powerful our voices are. They know that when men reject the lie that abortion only affects women and stand courageously against the opposition, they will lose. They know that if every single one of us boldly and proudly proclaims that we are pro-life and willing to fight to end abortion, that the next generations of young men and boys will see that example and will aspire to live it. That if we reject silence and passivity, then the next generations won't even see those as options. The opposition knows that if we lead, our families will follow, that the churches will follow, and that the country will follow. My friends, that is how we will change the culture, and that is how we will end abortion. So as we go forth, and we march and we pray, march with confidence and pray with conviction. Pray with confidence pray for confidence to truly be the man that God created you to be, to protect, to provide, to lead, to serve, and to leave a legacy that honors God, a legacy of life. Thank you.